go ahead and introduce the panelists and start this conversation. So Helen.
Thank you, Dave and Jessica, for the warm welcome. And thank you to Bioscience LA for inviting Seismic to this exciting event. I just want to say that you're doing great things for the life science community in Los Angeles, and we're just happy to contribute and to be a part of the community as well. And happy Wednesday afternoon and happy last day of the month to everyone. Welcome to the event, Disrupting the Status Quo for Future Life Science Leaders. We have a panelist of life science leaders here to share about their academic and career experiences and provide some insight that will hopefully help you with your own journey. My name is Helen Vong. I'm the Vice President of Business Development for Seismic. Some of you may be unfamiliar with who we are, so I'd like to share a few slides and just give a proper introduction. Let me go ahead and share screens with you. All right, so what is Seismic? Well, we have a talent platform that matches you to jobs based on your skills. Our platform does the job search for you. And what's great about this technology is that you're introduced to roles that you may not have thought you were a good fit for. Another thing that we do is provide career education resources, events similar to this that help you prepare you and also for a successful job search. And you must be wondering how Seismic came to be. Well, just let me tell you a little bit about how we started. Meet Danica and Elizabeth. They're Seismic's co-founders, both former scientists that realized how tough it was to transition from academia to industry. Now, along with the lack of educational resources for these type of career transitions, they noticed that there was a big disconnect between the language of recruiters and the language that scientists use on their resumes. And because of that, a company may miss seeing a good candidate, or a candidate may end up in a job that is not best fit for their skills. So Seismic was created as a way to address this and to make the process easier for job seekers. So this is essentially how our platform works in a nutshell. You create a career profile and list all the skills and expertise, and even some of the skills that you may not list on your resume, because if you were to list everything, it would be super long. The company creates a job profile for their role, listing all the skills required for the role, educational level, number of years of experience, and our system matches each new job to our database of users, and candidates that match the role are given direct access to apply. So all the applications go directly to the hiring manager, or in some cases, it's even the CEO or the CSO of the company. There's a lot of time saved on both ends. A typical job search takes about 3 to 4 months. Seismic can fill roles within 2 to 6 weeks. And we're doing the job search for you, and only notifying you when you match to the role. And on the company's end, they're receiving a smaller pool of candidates that already passed their screening process. And because of this, 50% of Seismic applicants are moved forward as opposed to 10% on all other job boards. Another thing I want to add about Seismic is that our skills matching is gender blind and race blind. We built our system specifically like this to remove the biases from the hiring process. So in addition to having more applicants move forward, Seismic has more people of color being hired compared to industry standards. And here are some testimonials of users in the company. The talk around town is quite positive about Seismic. So if you're beginning or preparing for your job search, please make sure you create a free career profile at www.seismic.com or get in touch and send me an email. Okay, and go ahead and stop this. All right, so to get started, I just briefly like to go over the event agenda. I'm going to introduce our lovely panelists shortly. They'll be sharing their career journey, and we'll open up for the rest of the event for Q&A. My colleague, Erin, everybody say hi to Erin, will be moderating the questions. So feel free to type them into the chat during the event, and we will address them during the Q&A session. Okay. Our first panelist is Adani Hamid. Adani is a product manager in Scopix, a neurotech startup in Bay Area. Adani received her bachelor's in psychology from Carleton College and received her PhD in neuroscience from the University of Illinois, Chicago. She continued her work in biomedical research as a postdoctoral fellow at NIH. And as a product manager, she combines her scientific and commercial background to drive new product development in collaboration with a cross-functional team. She is passionate about leveraging technology, emerging technology to positively impact human health and enable scientific discoveries with scientific positive impact. And Dani comes from a breadth of knowledge and experience in product management, as well as the startup world. If you're interested in non-traditional life science career, Dani may have some advice to help out with that. All right, our next panelist is Charisse Ayers. You could say hi. Charisse is passionate about animal and human medicine sectors, being a strong advocate for plant-based living and cultivating entrepreneurial experiences. She received her bachelor's in biology with a pre-veterinary concentration at Alfred University and is currently a graduate student at George Washington University studying medical laboratory sciences. Now, while juggling her studies as a graduate student, she also serves on the Student Advisory Board for Medical and Health Sciences, is a director of laboratory operations at Hook Diagnostics, and she is a laboratory support and project manager for the UCLA Pediatrics and Infectious Diseases Department. So if you have any questions about how to juggle a lot, Charisse may be your go-to person during the Q&A session. All right, and we have Genaro Pimenta. Genaro is a pharmaceutical chemist by training and has moved a lot both geographically and also across different disciplines in the biomedical sciences. Now, although his training and expertise and achievements have gravitated around proteins, he's also studying proteomics and protein chemistry in the biomedical field. Genaro is currently a senior scientist at Becton Dickinson Company in La Jolla, working in antibody technology, where he contributes to the development of new reagent-based antibodies. He received his bachelor's degree in pharmaceutical chemistry from the University of Guadalajara, his master's in peptide chemistry from the National Autonomous University of Mexico, and his PhD took him all the way to the other side of the world, where he received his degree in structural biology at the European Molecular Biology Laboratory at the University of Heidelberg in Germany. So prior to transitioning to industry, Genaro completed 3 postdocs at the Burnham Institute for Biomedical Research at Johns Hopkins University and also at Yale. He's been in San Diego for almost 5 years now and plans to stay indefinitely. Along with being an expert in proteins, Genaro is also a movie and book lover. He's dug into different literature genres and is currently a fan of hardcore science fiction, which is a story that adheres to valid scientific arguments. And as a scientist, I think it makes sense. If you have any questions about travel, about academia, transitioning to industry, proteins, or even recommendations about hardcore science fiction books, Genaro might be your go-to for the Q&A session. All right, so those were some great career snippets from our panelists, just to give you a little background of each of them. I'm excited for them to share a bit more. So let's kick off the conversation with Dani. I think our audience members who are looking for a non-traditional off-the-bench role are eager to hear about your academic and career story and those decisions along the way, from psychology to neuroscience to postdoc to program manager, and possibly everything in between. So Dani, do you want to start off with sharing your story?
Yeah, thank you, Helen, for the warm welcome, and really excited to be here with this group and discuss like my career journey. I apologize in advance. I have some construction going in my apartment, so there might be background here and there. So if you can't hear me at some point, just say it in the chat and I'll repeat myself. Like Helen mentioned, I did my bachelor's in psychology and really started off with interest in psychiatric illnesses and others, really neurological disorders, with the view that perhaps do medicine was one of the things that I had when I first started my bachelor's. But as I was in a small liberal arts college where you really had opportunities to do some research. And what I realized was for these specific things that I was interested in, really, there isn't really such great therapeutics for them at the time, and still isn't. And there's quite a lot that's still not known about, like psychiatric disorders or neurological disorders. And so I started working with one of my professors in terms of doing some research. And that was how I got into the research world. And as I was doing psychology research, I focused a bit more on behavioral psychology, So primarily using animal models to study behavior. But as I was doing that work, I realized that was not really enough for me. Like I really wanted to know what was going on in the brain. Hence, kind of while I was doing my work at Carleton, I pivoted towards wanting to do neuroscience. And at the time, neuroscience was not a major, at least at the college I was in. And perhaps now I think it might be a major in some places. And really though, neuroscience as a sector combines quite different aspects of science from biology, say, chemistry, physics, and sometimes math as well as psychology. And so really I started taking some of the courses that you would need to ensure like that you are a bit more ready for different kinds of neuroscience. And I applied for neuroscience PhD programs. At that point, like there was like the beginning of neuroscience programs as a major for PhD programs. So I ended up applying for one for a few places. And when I did the interviews that I did, I ended up liking some professors that I would want to work with at University of Illinois in Chicago, and ended up doing my PhD there. And I should say, right, I started with interest in behavioral psychology, wanted to add neuroscience. So really at that point, actually, the subject that I really thought I would want to study was drug addiction. It's one of those illnesses that's really quite misunderstood. There's a tendency to think people have a choice in terms of, being addicted, in the sense you're choosing to take these drugs and continue to take them. And hence the burden is put on the person who has this illness. And there was this publication I had read when I was an undergrad that like kind of was like, oh, like this is really misunderstood and like really has biological foundations. And so when I did my grad school work, what I thought I wanted to study was really like drug addiction, where you tie being able to record from the brain, but also see in behavior, because for addiction, you also need behavior. But I did some rotations, and I'm one of those people though. So when you do grad school, you generally have the opportunity to rotate through multiple labs. And I did rotation in 3 labs. 2 of the labs did work on drug addiction, but then I also wanted to try something a bit different than what I knew I wanted at the time. And that one really didn't have anything to do actually with behavior particularly, but looked at synaptic transmission. For synaptic transmission is really the way neurons communicate with each other. And so at this point, it's you're now really looking at the cell biology aspect of neuroscience. And when I did that work, at the time, the tools that were there for studying drug addiction was not enough for me like to compel me towards really actually studying that. Whereas like this, there were tools for synaptic transmission that I really found intriguing. And so ended up actually doing a very basic biology kind of focused neuroscience PhD. And after I did that, I'll also admit I was one of the people where I was not sure whether I wanted to continue in academia or go into industry. And the general recommendation, the default tends to be then do a postdoc. I would be like, it's worth stating though, if I was advising someone now, while I was at that point of whether to do a postdoc or not when you're really uncertain, I don't think you actually should do a postdoc if you're uncertain. While the default is, if you're uncertain, do a postdoc so that you still have the option to choose academia or industry. But it's really if you're in a PhD program, or in your cases, while you're doing your undergrad, if you're also even uncertain about doing a PhD program, talk to people, like do informational interview to understand what are the kinds of things you're interested in, and then perhaps actually gear yourself towards it. But that was not really an advice that's out there. Quite often, I believe you're talking to professors who do not have the background when it comes to work in industry to really advise you properly. And so I ended up doing a postdoc at NIH. I really liked doing microscopy work at that point, and it combined like some of the latest microscopy that was being developed, like super resolution imaging and other things. And for the things I was interested in with synaptic transmission, really to be able to see things in greater detail, you needed to be able to resolve them like at nanometer resolution. general, for most microscopy, the kind of resolution you tend to have is at best like in the micron range, like 300 micron at the best, but really more commonly in the 300 nanometer, which is like 0.3 micron, but more commonly it's like 1 or 2 microns. And so the lab I ended up choosing really had all these breadth of tools that you could use. So I ended up joining NIH and working there. And one of the things that I did do that I kind of would always recommend is like what you guys are doing now is attending these kinds of events. While I was at postdoc at NIH, when there was career like fair or insights such as people talking about their career journey outside of academia, I always attended it. And one of the things worth doing, which I did not do, which I would recommend, is follow up with some of these people. If someone is willing to come talk to you in these venues, they're most likely willing to also network with you, and building your network is going to be something that really will help you along your journey, really, at the journey towards your career. Yeah, so as I was doing my postdoc, one of the things you'll learn if you join the academic world is if you want to be a professor, really generally you tend to need to prove that you can get funding. I was funded when I was in grad school as well as postdoc, so that was something I could show. But the other thing is at least for neuroscience, you needed publications in some of the top journals, which is especially like specifically like Science, Cell, or Nature, or you need a lot more publication in specific segment of journals. And I'll also admit I was one of the people like kind of didn't step back and think while I was in a postdoc to see what do I want to do. And I was at a stage though where one of the work I was working on really had a good chance of being published in Nature, and which made it like it's more realistic to be able to be a professor. And that was when I really actually stepped back and said, do I really want to go on to pursue the academic research? And in some ways, when there were no more like real obstacles, my answer was really no, because in some ways, I'm not someone, what I realized was when I was doing my postdoc, by this point, I really gone really deep into one topic for around 10 years, really, including my PhD and my postdoc. But the seminars I really wanted to attend were quite diverse. I wanted to hear about other kinds of research and things like that. And when it comes to research itself, while I really like the conceptualizing of like what to study and why to study it, which is quite important, like in, let's say, grant writing or even in publications in the introduction. And I liked optimizing an experiment, but I will admit I did not like repeating experiments, which is quite essential for research. So I did have the answer that bench research was not for me, in the sense, like given that I don't like keep recording experiments. And so it was at that time in my postdoc when I had the answer saying like, yeah, I do not really want to pursue this, I really started talking to people outside to understand what are the kinds of roles available to you. And I will say, while I was a postdoc, I did not know like product manager as a role existed. And so I spoke with a few people. And in terms of what I pivoted to was I knew I did like troubleshooting, and I was supporting other like labs and others for using a microscopy and things like that. So what I ended up doing was I had a very good relationship with our reps for different microscopy companies that I used, and so used that as my network to see if working in one of those places was an option. And so the other thing that I did at least is, if you're focused in the biomedical science, being in the right place is going to be also important, right? You want to be in places, in hubs where there are going to be multiple opportunities. So and also where you like. Now, if you're not pursuing academia, you can also choose your location, basically. And so I had friends in the Bay Area, and it's one of the hubs where there are lots of opportunities in biomedical research. So I ended up working with Nikon in the role of support as well as sales. And I know sales is like quite a huge pivot from doing complete research, but it was really great experience because it's a side that you're not really taught in research, but I was bringing my experience of supporting science because I already was doing the science that was needed for supporting microscopy. And the other things that I learned from sales was like the idea of being proactive in terms of whatever you're doing, in the sense you have a very concrete target you have to meet. And if you're not proactively going after things, you're not really going to get them. And it's like, you know, it forces you to cold call to people, in the sense, email them in this sense. But it's also, I heavily relied on my scientific skills, in the sense it's a consultative meetings where you're talking to people about their science, understanding what they need, and then really recommending specific things from the product portfolio you're working with. But part of my goal was, by moving to the Bay Area, learn this aspect, but also understand a bit more other roles that are in industry. And while I was in Nikon, I had a recruiter approach me to work with Inscopix. And for Inscopix, it's a Neurotech, as Helen mentioned. And really, it ended up combining two things that I really cared about, which was like looking at behavior to really and eventually understand therapeutics for psychiatric disorders and neurological disorders, and also being able to study neuroscience more in detail. So it just basically combined what I started off wanting to do neuroscience in when I started my PhD. And so I ended up joining Inscopix as a sales manager for the West Coast. And as I was in Inscopix, part of the benefit of being in a startup that is at the segment of both biomedical research and the tech world, you do end up working with really a broad group, from engineering, the support team, our R&D neuroscience group as well. And in that case, like, you know, as you continue to your, like, to do the conversations, to understand what are the different roles and things like that, what could be a better fit for you. And that's when I kind of really realized the kinds of role that I really wanted was product manager, because it really was the role that for me really combines a lot of my interest. You're still working with on the technical side quite heavily, but you're also using your commercial side, because in terms of product, kind of when you talk about product strategy, it's like the art and science of understanding customer problem and then aligning the organization around creating basically a desirable outcome for both the customer and the business. So it was kind of a combination where I could combine the different things I've done by this point. It is a non-traditional role in the sense, typically you do find product managers in the more the tech world, in the sense of like, let's say Facebook, Google, and others. But if you're looking at life sciences company like Inscopix, it is a role that exists. And as the as there is more alignment between biopharma and technology as well, this is something that would be continued to grow in the pharma world as well as biotech. So it was a very long-winded journey. I hope that's helpful.
I do agree with what you just said. Like we do have a lot of companies that are looking for project managers, product managers, specifically with the science background. It seems like it's hard to find. So that is something that is definitely coming out in the market. So if there's something that the audience members are interested in, like your advice is very, very helpful. So I think with your experience of transitioning from academia to industry, we could lead it off to Hanaro, who actually just recently transitioned to an industry role, and he can share a little bit about his career story. And I'm sure that there's going to be plenty of questions for you in the end as well, Adini, during the Q&A. Hanaro?
Yeah, so I think I liked Danny's introduction because she talks a lot about how, you know, the windy path from academia to industry and how sometimes one is not very sure of what one wants. In that sense, I would say that I don't think I knew I knew what I wanted more or less, but I did not know how to get there. And I think that's what led me to moving so much. And what I take from there is that having moved, having been exposed to many different environments within academia, I can say that things change a lot from region to region and from field to field. And that's what helps you a lot move on to another, you know, situation in science, which is what companies And echoing on Adina, I think that a quick move onto companies is good, but it may be risky too. So if somebody asks me, when do you think it's good to move from academia to companies? I perceive two paths. I've seen people that move right after undergrad onto companies, acquire experience, and then they go back to doing their PhD. And once they finish their PhD, they move back to companies. Why is that useful? Because you go onto companies, you get experience, lab experience, exposure to what is, how do you use science, and we can call it the real world. But then you go back to do your PhD and you're not only mature, but you're skilled in the lab. That buffers you from incidents that you can't control, such as a neurotic boss or a hard project. So you kind of buffer those situations. You're not, under the perils of what can happen, what can go wrong. And the same way I've seen people that made it up to a professorship, but then things go wrong and they have to go back or look for a job. Now, having had that connection in industry, it's easy for them to move back to industry, but now at a higher position. And that's one thing that takes me to also saying that it is good to have a postgraduate training, because if you arrive at a company with only an undergraduate at undergrad level, you do well, but you sometimes or many times do not advance to very high positions. There is a bias, or having a PhD does help you get to leadership positions. So it all depends on what wants. And that's why I think that back when I was a student, professors, people in academia would talk about the dark side. It was very often very common to talk about the dark side. And it was back in when the genome was being sequenced, and when this guy, Craig Venter, kicked in and started to push the academic world by using private money, and how he pushed and made it pretty far by using private money. And he was being villainized. I'm not saying he's a nice guy. I'm just saying that he was villainized simply because he was using private money. But that competition between him and the NIH and the Wellcome Trust Center in Europe really made the sequencing of the genome happen before we even imagined it, because there was a lot of competition, political and academic, he drove it. So what I'm trying to say is that that dark side that people spoke about back then wasn't really that dark. But as a student, you would talk and you would hear your professors say that. And I now see this in retrospective, and having been a staff scientist at Yale, I would see generations of students who I participated in training them. I see them, most of them jumping right after PhD into companies in very different, very diverse directions, whether project manager, whether in sales, field application scientist, and they do it pretty quickly. And that's something that we were not taught back then.
Hanara, I'm curious, when during
Yeah.
your career academic, your career trajectory, when you decided to enter the dark side.
The dark side. What was known as the dark side.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I had actually considered doing it already for a while, but it was one of those things in which you're also taught not to give up. And in academia, you have this goal, I want to be a professor. And you keep, trying. And at some point it does happen, not the way you want it to happen, but you still think that you don't want to give up. And it was more about not that I did not like the private sector, but I didn't want to be perceived as having given up. And but I did reach a point in which I realized that I wasn't gonna get anywhere anymore in academia, so I made that move. And that's very hard, because at this stage when you're interviewing, they always ask you the obvious question. They know the answer, but they ask it, why now? And it's tricky, because what are you going to tell them? No. Why now? So it is hard, but in a way it does help also to come in with experience, because you're weathered, how to do things, how to tackle things. So you do bring a lot of skills, a lot of experience into companies, but it is hard to blend in, especially like you saw with resume that is very academic, and they tell you should modify, you should this and that, and you just don't know how to do it. you look at it and you can't tell what's wrong with it.
Mhm.
So you do need some clever help, and it does make a change. There's a disconnect between the language from recruiters, from the hiring managers actually, and you, and this mutual bias. People in private companies, I'm aware that they try to villainize people in academia and the other way. I don't think it happens that often anymore, but there is an interesting bias, an interesting preconception on both sides. In the end, we do very similar things. It's just, well, the application or the angle is what
Yeah.
differs.
It's definitely,
Yeah.
one of our founders, Danica, she had completed a few postdocs too, and when she did the transition, it was a tough transition, and I work with a lot of different hiring managers, and I do find people with PhDs or people that have done multiple postdocs are having a hard time transitioning to industry because they're looking, I guess when you're in academia, you're doing a lot of independent work, and when you're in industry,
Exactly.
a lot of collaborative work. So I think being able to prove to the hiring managers, they're like, hey, I can work in a team. That's important when you're transitioning as well.
You bring out an important concept of, depending on the labs you are, sometimes if you're consistently in labs that they call swim or sink, it doesn't mean that you're a bad team player, but it means that you've been taught to do things yourself and to survive yourself. They give you the means, but they don't give you the direction. And that's a question they keep asking you in interviews. Give me an example of a deep collaborative project in which you participated, and what did you do? And I was being honest. I don't know if that helped me or not, but I'm sorry, but I've always worked in sink or swim situations, and yes, I did this and that, but no, but a real collaborative, I would say, I'm sorry, but I don't think I can give you an example. And it's not because one is not collaborative, but rather because that's how it works. Yeah, there is a big problem there.
Well, I think it's great that your academic studies took you all around the world, and then now you're in San Diego where you're going to stay indefinitely. So that's great. So let me transition over to Charisse. Charisse is handling multiple things, wearing multiple hats all at the same time while finishing her graduate degree. Charisse, do you want to share your story and how you transitioned to each role and what you're doing now?
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to say thank you to Bioscience LA and Seismic, and especially Helen for having me here. With my background, I originally wanted to become a vet, and I pursued, the typical route that a lot of students do. You find out you need to get a bachelor's degree, preferably in biology, and then from there you typically you apply for several vet schools, you wait, and then you see if you get in or not. But for me personally, I found that with networking while I was in undergrad and pursuing a lot of different internships, one that I did in particular was at Iowa State, being able to study poultry disease, it allowed me to pause a little bit and see that, maybe I could blend veterinary sciences and, the aspect of being able to work in a clinical lab together, right? And I developed, the path of trying to reach out to people that kind of did something like this, but it was very hard to find people that delved into veterinary science and also wanted to be a clinical scientist. I think I only found two by the time I graduated from Alfred University. So what I really did is I ended up pausing for a little bit, pursuing, like Gennaro did say, opportunities outside of academia, and really just getting into industry to get that experience to understand how I could build into the field that I wanted to develop for myself, especially because I didn't see a lot of veterinary professionals or even a lot of clinical scientists delving into a lot of different sectors. So I ended up working at a biotechnology company for a little bit. And I said, well, I really want to incorporate some sort of animal experience here. How can I do that? And then while working there, I ended up taking on another position as a veterinary assistant. And I found that I loved being able to learn things in the biotech industry and seeing the similarities in a lab. And with that, and knowing those skills and having those skills while I was working in both of those positions was very difficult, because juggling 2 to 3 different jobs at the same time can be very daunting. But with learning all of the different skill sets and seeing what I learned in both industries, I tried to find master's degree programs that could kind of cater to that's the type of position that I kind of wanted to build for myself. So I ended up pursuing a master's in medical laboratory sciences because I really liked the fact that, you know, there was a huge, I guess, a huge vacancy with a lot of research that you see in veterinary diagnostics, specifically catered towards exotics. And that's what I wanted to specialize in once I get into vet school, was veterinary diagnostics, right? Getting into exotics and seeing, like, why is there a vacancy for this? Why aren't people interested in this? How can I get more skill set and more of an interest to be able to, I guess, develop more projects and get more people excited about this field, because I didn't see a lot of people doing it. So I ended up enrolling in GW. It's a great program, right? I love the fact that I'm able to learn about point of care testing, being a clinical lab scientist, while also being able to kind of blend in that animal experience and be able to understand how to develop point of care testing, how to design a lab, basically how to teach people how to run specific projects specifically to what I wanted to do. So that's kind of how I kind of navigated from, I guess, undergrad directly into a little bit more of experience prior to going into graduate school. I know it's typically not a common pathway, which is why I spoke to a lot of people beforehand, but I do find it's rewarding. And what I do mean by that is, during the plight of COVID, I actually got recruited for a Regeneron study in the New York City hospital because they did need researchers to assist them with a specific, trying to think of the drug that it's an immunosuppressive drug. I think it's like Kevzara, targeted for rheumatoid arthritis, and seeing how that could treat potential COVID-19 victims. And that's where I kind of saw, especially in the pandemic now, that's kind of where I kind of saw where you can build your careers, you can build your positions. And as long as you have skills that can apply in a lot of different places, you can take them pretty much anywhere, right? So with being recruited for the COVID research project in the NYC hospital, it kind of allowed me to see that with the pandemic, you can actually, you know, pivot in a lot of different ways that a lot of people didn't see. I actually ended up moving to Los Angeles because of that. And with my first opportunity in Los Angeles, I actually assisted with building a clinical laboratory in Sony Entertainment, and helping them to basically figure out, like, based on the dimensions and the logistics that we have here, how can we provide surveillance testing for this facility? And I did that for another company, Worksite Labs, pretty much the same thing, traveling all around California to basically set up labs and set up spaces for different groups of people. So basically tailoring my skill set, you know, to different positions. It's different positions, but based on your skills and being able to use the same set of skills that you have and that you've developed for yourself, you can pivot in a lot of different ways. And I've been able to do that a lot. So I guess just for me, just for students out there that, you know, like, they're on the fence about veterinary school or any type of, I guess, higher level education, and you don't particularly see a field out there for yourself, connect with people. And if you don't see anything now, you know, you can definitely make these roles for yourself. Like I have with Hook Diagnostics, I've made a position for myself where it's a laboratory operational role now, but I work in the operation side. I work in research and development, and I also work with the marketing side, right? So you get a little bit of everything when you're a little bit more willing to drop your skill sets into more than one basket and be a little bit more open to expanding your opportunities.
I think it's important what you shared, or it's really good what you shared about how your skills could be applied to so many different jobs. The importance of looking at a job description and just kind of like figuring out, like, okay, what are they asking for? What skills do I have that fit into that? And basically designing your resume or your experience to sell the story, or you know, whoever's reviewing the resume, to show them that, like, hey, this is how I fit into all these responsibilities that you're asking. These are the skills that I have. So rather than having a recruiter look at your resume and try to figure out where you fit in, you're basically redesigning or tailoring your resume so that way you're telling them the story of, like, I'm a good fit for your role. You should hire me. So
Right.
that's
And
important for you to share.
not necessarily having to give up on particular things. Like if there's something you're interested in, especially for people that are younger, I'm in my mid-20s right now. I still have a broad base that I can expand. But what I basically want to let people know is that, you know, the opportunities are endless, right? So even with veterinary medicine and stuff like that, I still want to pursue veterinary school, but there's a lot of ways to get into all of these industries, and they're opening up, especially because of the pandemic. And I've actually had a lot of success because of the flexibility that can be afforded to me because of the pandemic. My program was put online, right? And I know graduate school is already a daunting task, and then on top of that, adding it online can be more challenging. And then considering the fact that I am a part of Student Advisory Board, I just recently got into George Washington's Graduate Senate. I just now accepted a role at UCLA. I'm helping Hook Diagnostics. There's always going to be a way for you to take the large quantity of skills that you have. And if you don't see a role for yourself right now, you can build that. There have been times where I reached out to people and I said, hey, I think I'm a great fit here. These are the skills that I would love to sit down with you, whether it be lunch or, you know, just a small brief meeting, and then just talk about the opportunities that you do have. And a lot of the times they like that because they don't necessarily have a posting, but they have a lot of projects and they simply don't know how to build a role for it. Right. So if you come in there and you say, well, this is my skills, I'm in veterinary medicine, I'm very interested in human sciences. I don't necessarily want to go into healthcare, just to give you an example, but I have these skills and I want to use them. You can build your position. I'm working on a lot of other side projects as well with different companies in cannabis and other things like that. And this is all due to the fact that I have a core set of skills that pretty much apply to a lot of different fields in the science industry. So that's just my main note for you guys is if you don't see anything and you want to pursue something, reach out to people. The worst they could say is no, but at the end of the day, you still get that connection. And if something does pop up, they might even reach out to you. I've had that happen a lot for myself.
You might get a lot of LinkedIn requests now. All of you, actually. Okay, so thank you for sharing, everyone for sharing this story. Now let's open it up to some Q&A. Erin, did we get some questions in the chat? If not, we can just open it up to anyone just going on unmute and asking the question if you'd like.
Yeah, we can have people, people would like to unmute and ask directly. That would be great. Actually, we have one. Does anyone have advice for high school students that want to become an intern?
I can answer that. So my first internship outside of school, typically when you do a Google search, you see a lot of the same things where it says reach out to reps and reach out to specific organizations. But what I found is LinkedIn is an amazing source, right? So prior to what I said before, with just being able to connect to people, if you have something that you're really interested in and you see someone on LinkedIn that you're excited to work with, and you happen to also see that they have an internship, apply to that internship and reach out to them directly and follow up for sure. That's actually how I got my internship at Iowa State University. I did my research on Google, found a lot of different internships, took notes down, figured out who was specifically in that department, reached out to those individuals, and then made sure to follow up on LinkedIn as well. So that would be a really good way. If you ever see anything that you're interested in, do the general Google search, look for the organization, make sure you really know a little bit about the organization. If they do have articles, make sure you read a few of those, and then just, kind of start a conversation about the articles or their work, and show that you're interested on other platforms rather than leaving it just for the application itself.
Thank you. Kind of going along internships, are all internships typically unpaid, or is there advice for looking for paid internships?
So for me, all of the internships that I've actually done were paid. a lot of the universities, like if you do like, I think on, I don't know the website offhand, but there's a place that actually has a long list of internships for all universities all over the US and some parts of Canada and the UK, where those are actually paid, and they actually offer travel fees. They'll pay you for your actual work. And then they'll pay you for food and for all these other things. So a lot of these organizations, like Iowa State did it, Penn State also did them. A lot of these universities, they actually have a lot of paid internships. And I know that a lot of people are actually starting to phase out a lot of these unpaid internships. So I would explore those.
The university kind of sponsored internships?
Yeah, so I would go directly on university websites just to see, they have a lot of summer internships, fall, winter, and they're typically paid internships. So I'll check that out directly on those college pages.
Great advice, thank you. Does anyone have any tips for interacting with recruiters?
I can share. I mean, we have a lot of people that are looking for jobs. I think it's yeah, you can be friendly. LinkedIn is a really good resource. You can connect with people. Like you can look for, if there's a particular, let's say that there's a particular company that you're eyeing or a particular role that you're eyeing that you see that there's a job opening. I would look for anyone that's working within HR or talent acquisition, send them a connection invite, send a message. You can share your resume if you like, maybe share some of the skills or strengths that could be applied, just like, Cherie said, you can share, this is the skills that I have. They may not have a job opening, but maybe this company is some company that you're interested in. You can share what skills they have, and hopefully they can create a job opportunity around that. I think it's always be nice and respectful. Let's see, communication, following through. If they ask for a resume, send the resume. Thank people for their time. I think that's important as well. I think what I hear sometimes is when you have a interview, let's say you have an interview, back in the day, people used to always follow up with a thank you, thank you for taking your time to interview and speak to me. Sometimes that doesn't happen anymore. So I think it's always courteous or to be respectful to thank people for their time, especially if they spend time speaking to you or mentoring you or taking their time out of the day. So I think that's important.
How formal should that first outreach be? Can you just reach out and introduce yourself, or should you have a kind of written elevator pitch prepared?
I tend to be more casual. Yeah. So I think it depends on who you're reaching out to. I would just, my advice is just to be kind of casual. You don't want to give too much on that first interaction. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree with Helen. I would say, just keep it short, sweet, succinct, and to the point. Not too formal. And just make sure you get your main points across.
Because I think those recruiters are probably bombarded with a lot of different messages. So if you're keeping it short, sweet, maybe something a little unique, you might stand out among the crowd.
Advice. For the panelists, did most of your networking start from building a relationship with a professor, or did you network with different faculty or staff members from different departments at your university? So was it like a primary teaching or mentoring professors, or did you network throughout your department?
I've networked a lot through friends I met at meetings or people I interacted with during a postdoc. I think, in my opinion, those help a lot more. People you worked with or you interacted at a meeting, or they're aware of your personality or work rather than the professor himself or herself.
This be at conferences as well?
Yeah, any event or activity.
Yeah, I would also add, like, if you're either an undergrad or grad school, when there are invited speakers and things like that, usually there's opportunities to join for lunch or other kinds of extra time. Volunteer for those and interact with these different faculty members from like different universities, and then follow up, obviously, like to ensure you maintain that relationship.
I
But
think
yeah, I would agree with Henaro. Yeah.
Sorry, I was going to say during COVID, I think COVID, it's a great time because a lot of the events, there's so many events that are remote, and you can attend events that are like even outside of the state. So I think take the chance to participate in those events, those remote events. You can look on Eventbrite. There's lots of events listed, different networking opportunities as well. So take advantage of that.
We have someone who's interested in pursuing internal medicine. Is currently in high school. Do you have any advice for someone who's in high school, probably looking for colleges soon, looking at a medical track?
I can answer if you'd like to.
Yeah, I definitely think pursuing veterinary school is probably similar to a pre-med track. So definitely.
Yeah. So I can give some steps to how I prepared. So after I'm done with my master's degree program, I'm actually looking to apply. But before that, I actually reached out to a lot of local vets near me. So with you, I would actually recommend, if you can reach out to local internal medicine physicians, that'd be great. And be able to just shadow them, ask them questions, just kind of ask them what they did to prepare. I'm not sure how many hours you need for the medical side, but I do know for veterinary school, there are a specific amount of hours that each school is looking for. So trying to get a lot of different experiences early on is great, because depending on the school and depending on how competitive, the other people that may apply are, you might have to start a little bit earlier to get a lot of those hours. The way I started was, like I said, I shadowed a bunch of local vets. I asked if I could help around. I did volunteer work. I did a lot of internships that were closely related to, the animal sciences sector. And then once LinkedIn, kind of hit my visceral eye, I really started connecting a lot on LinkedIn and making sure that, like, for the people that I was really interested in based off of what their resume or what their LinkedIn page looked like, I really reached out to them just to see like how they navigated through it. What do they have in terms of recommendations, or just stuff like that. Like mainly connecting, prepping early if you can, reaching out to people early is best.
Thank you. I actually have a question before. I noticed for the talk, there's a lot of talk about different interests and a lot of combining different interests into career path. And it's kind of a big question, but maybe very important for a lot of our attendees who are, high school, early college. How do you know when you found something you're very passionate about, or how do you know that you're, I guess, on the path that you want to be on? I'd like to hear from each of the panelists what you think about that.
In my opinion, as for me, I don't think you're on the right path. I knew that I was doing something that I liked, but I mean, knowing that you're on the path, I couldn't say you can honestly know. Some people think they're on the path, but in my opinion, when you think you are so early, you're probably not exploring options in your head. I mean, it's valid to be confused at a very early stage. I don't know if I'm rambling or not.
Yeah, and it's probably then also okay to be preparing for something that a career path or something that you think you want, and maybe have it not be what you ultimately end up doing, but it's still experience well worth it.
Knowing that you want to do a PhD and you like proteins, but not knowing where's that going to take you, right? That's an example.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Gennaro on that. I always wanted to be a vet ever since I was a kid, and then I did my internship at Iowa State, and I had to pause because I actually really like the research side of things. Still want to be a vet very much so, but that entryway into research just really caught my eye, and I didn't want to let go of it. So that's why for me personally, I found that I had to pause a little bit just in terms of my end goal of being a vet, to explore the research path, because I didn't want to let that go either. So even now I'm still figuring out, you know, ways how I can blend that veterinary side with the kind of the clinical scientist side, which is when you hear about it in the media and you hear about it in academia, it's more catered around human diagnostics, and you very seldom hear about, you know, animal diagnostics in comparison to the human side. So for me, it's kind of blending those two worlds together, and yeah, it's kind of like an ongoing process where just explore things that you love and just see if there's, you know, ways to be able to do those things.
Yeah, I would agree with both Hanaro and Charisse. I don't know, even as a kid, I did not fully know what I wanted to do. So I felt I was one of the anomalies because I had a sister who like for sure wanted to be a pediatrician kind of thing. I think part of life's journey is discovering things as you go along. And for me, I've changed what I've done here and there, but in general, I've ended up using what I learned from one into applying it to something else as well. As an example, like for example, one of my colleagues who's our social media manager basically combined what she did in her personal life, which is like Instagram, blogging, and other things, and then did her PhD in neuroscience and basically used those two things when it came to like getting the job in our company, which was her first industry position. I don't know if she could claim at the beginning when she did the social media or the other work that she really knew this is what she wanted. And like I said, like the role I'm currently doing as a product manager is not really a role I knew of at all in reality until I started working with a startup. So I personally, even now, I'm definitely happy with the work that I'm doing, but I can't say this is going to be something I want to do forever. I'm learning a lot from it, and then it's like, you know, if I pivot, I think it's okay.
The important
Whatever keeps you happy, I think.
Exactly. Yeah. I think. Yeah, each time, each things that I've done it was the thing that I wanted to do, and then kind of maybe just think a little of a step back and see, does this give you some skills that can be taken to other things?
Thank you, everyone. Charisse, Gennaro, Adani, everyone for sharing your stories. We are at the top of the hour, end of the session. I do want to say thank you for all our attendees for coming, and hopefully this information was helpful. And Jessica, I'll hand it off to you for closing.